On my wedding night, my husband died. A week later, the truth shocked me. The doctor said his heart just stopped. I said that was impossible. He was 34. He ran 6 miles every morning. The doctor looked at me the way people look at someone they've already decided is in shock. He was wrong. I wasn't in shock. I was already counting the things that didn't add up. My name is Rachel Ainsley. I'm 32. I live in Savannah, Georgia. 6 days before that night, I married Nathaniel Colby in a courtyard behind the Marshall House. String lights overhead. 70 guests, my father crying more than I'd ever seen him cry in my life. Nate co-founded a software company called Virion Analytics with a man named David Kessler 8 years earlier. By the time we got married, Virion was 3 weeks from closing an $18 million acquisition deal with a larger firm out of Atlanta. Nate had told me the week before the wedding that the deal was finally happening, and that our honeymoon in Portugal would be the first real vacation he'd taken in 5 years. We never made it to Portugal. Nate and I met 4 years earlier at a fundraiser for the Savannah College of Art and Design, where I taught graphic design part-time. He was awkward in the way genuinely brilliant people sometimes are outside their own field, spilling wine on my sleeve within the first 10 minutes of meeting me and apologizing about it for the rest of the night. I liked him immediately, in a way I hadn't liked anyone in years. David Kessler had been part of Nate's life since their sophomore year at Georgia Tech, long before I ever entered the picture. Nate used to describe their partnership like a marriage of its own, the kind that survives disagreements because neither person can imagine building anything without the other. I believed that too. Right up until the week everything I believed about both of them fell apart. The reception ran until 11. Nate gave a toast that made my mother cry. David Kessler gave a toast too, longer than it needed to be, full of inside jokes about their college years that half the room didn't understand and laughed at anyway. We left the reception around midnight, checked into our suite at the hotel 3 blocks away, and Nate complained once we were alone that he felt strange, dizzy. His hands were cold. I asked if he'd had too much champagne. I only had 2 glasses, he said. Same as you. By 12:40, he was sweating through his shirt. By 1, he said his chest felt tight, like something was sitting on it. He tried to laugh it off at first, joking that maybe marriage was already giving him a heart attack. And I laughed too, because it didn't yet occur to either of us that the joke might be literal. By 1:15, he couldn't finish a sentence without stopping to breathe. I called 911 at 1:07 a.m. He lost consciousness in the ambulance somewhere on Abercorn Street, the paramedic working over him while I sat pressed against the wall of the ambulance, still in my wedding dress, still wearing the earrings his mother had given me 2 days before. He was pronounced dead at Memorial Health University Medical Center at 2:14 a.m., 6 hours after we said our vows. The emergency room doctor, a man named Dr. Aaron Pruitt, told me it looked like sudden cardiac arrest. It happens sometimes in young, healthy people, he said, more often than people realize. We won't know more until the medical examiner completes a full workup. David Kessler showed up at the hospital at 3 in the morning, still in his tuxedo, and sat with me in the waiting room while I called Nate's parents. He held my hand and said all the right things. He cried, actually cried, in a way that looked completely real. I believed every bit of it that night. I had no reason not to. The funeral was 4 days later. Nate's mother, Diane, could barely stand through the service. His father didn't speak at all. I stood at the front of a church in a black dress I'd bought 2 days earlier, having no idea that black dress would need to fit into the rest of my life so soon after buying a white one. David gave the eulogy. He talked about Nate's ambition, his loyalty, his 8 years building Virion like a second family. He said Nate would have wanted the acquisition to close on schedule, as a tribute to everything he built. Something about that sentence sat wrong with me. I couldn't name it yet, but grief has a way of making you notice things you'd otherwise let slide. And that line, the acquisition closing on schedule as a tribute, felt less like grief and more like scheduling. 3 days after the funeral, the medical examiner's office called. The woman on the phone, a case coordinator named Renee Ashford, told me the toxicology screen had come back with an anomaly, and that the medical examiner, Dr. Priya Anand, a forensic pathologist with 14 years of experience at the Chatham County office, wanted to speak with me directly. Dr. Anand didn't waste time on gentle language. Your husband's initial cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest, she said. The expanded toxicology panel found elevated digoxin levels in his blood, well beyond any therapeutic range, and well beyond anything explainable by an existing prescription. Mr. Colby had no cardiac history, and no digoxin prescription on file with any pharmacy in the state. What does that mean? Digoxin, in the amount we found, can induce fatal arrhythmia in someone with an otherwise healthy heart, she said. In plain terms, Mrs. Colby, I don't believe your husband died of natural causes. I believe he was poisoned, and I've referred this case to the Savannah Police Department's homicide unit. I asked her the only question that mattered in that moment. How long would it have taken, from the dose to the heart stopping? Based on the concentration we found and typical absorption rates, somewhere between 1 and 3 hours, Dr. Annan said. Consistent with a dose administered sometime during your reception. That meant it happened in a room full of people who loved him. It meant someone stood close enough to hand him something, smiled, and walked away, knowing exactly what they'd started. I sat on my kitchen floor for a long time after that call, the same kitchen floor where I'd laid out wedding seating charts 3 weeks earlier, and I thought about the sentence David gave at the funeral. As a tribute, scheduled, on track. Detective Marcus Webb of the Savannah Police Department's Homicide Unit, 11 years on the force, 6 specializing in poisoning and pharmaceutical-related deaths, met with me 2 days later in a small interview room that smelled like burnt coffee. He asked careful, methodical questions. Who had access to Nate that night? Who poured the drinks? Who had motive? I need you to think hard, he said. Digoxin doesn't get into someone's system by accident. Someone gave it to him deliberately, in a dose calculated to look like a natural cardiac event hours later. That takes planning. That takes access. I told him about the toast, about the 2 glasses of champagne, about David Kessler holding my hand in the hospital waiting room at 3 in the morning, still in his tuxedo, crying real tears. People can cry real tears over things they caused, Detective Webb said. Not unkindly, just factually, the way someone states something they've seen too many times to soften anymore. Grief and guilt aren't as different as people assume. Tell me about the business, he continued. The acquisition you mentioned. That's when I remembered something I hadn't thought to mention yet. A comment Nate made 2 weeks before the wedding, half joking, the kind of thing you forget until it matters. He'd said David had been acting weird about the acquisition terms, pushing hard for a larger personal payout structured differently than their original partnership agreement. Detective Webb wrote that down without comment, but I noticed he underlined it twice. Detective Webb brought in a forensic accountant, a man named Harold Chen, 20 years of experience unwinding corporate fraud cases across Georgia, to review Virion's partnership documents and the pending acquisition terms. What Harold Chen found took 9 days to fully untangle. He walked Detective Webb and me through it together in a conference room at the police station, spreading printed documents across the table like a man laying out a case he already knew the ending to. 8 months before the wedding, Virion's board approved a standard key person life insurance policy on Nate, Harold said, worth $2 million, payable to the company in the event of his death. Standard practice for a startup whose value depends heavily on its founders. The original beneficiary designation named Virion Analytics as a corporate entity, meaning the payout would be split according to ownership percentage. Nate held 40%. That means his estate, meaning you, Mrs. Colby, would have been entitled to roughly $800,000 from that payout, on top of his general estate and his share of the acquisition proceeds. And the new one, Harold slid a second document across the table. 3 weeks before the wedding, a beneficiary change form was filed with the insurance carrier, altering the payout structure so that David Kessler, individually, would receive the full $2 million directly, with no obligation to distribute any portion to Nate's estate. The form bore Nate's signature. Harold Chen didn't think it was real. Nate Colby's signature, based on the samples I compared it against, was consistently fast and slightly slanted right, he told Detective Webb. This signature is upright, slow, and evenly spaced. It's not impossible for a signature to vary day to day, but paired with a beneficiary change that financially benefits only one specific person, filed 3 weeks before a sudden, unexplained death, it's the kind of coincidence that stops looking like a coincidence fast. The form had been notarized at a small, independent notary office in Pooler, Georgia, a 20-minute drive from Virion's headquarters, not the law firm Virion normally used for corporate paperwork, and not anywhere Nate had ever used for personal documents before. The notary, a woman named Connie Reyes, had run that small office out of a strip mall for 6 years, mostly handling car titles and the occasional real estate closing. She remembered the appointment clearly when Detective Webb showed her a photo lineup, tapping David's photo almost immediately. He came in with another man, she said, introduced him as Nate, had his ID ready, seemed rushed. I remember because most people who come in for something like a life insurance change bring paperwork already filled out. These two barely spoke to me, just needed a signature witnessed fast. The one they called Nate barely looked up from his phone the whole time. Detective Webb asked her to describe the man who signed. Her description, early 40s, sandy hair, slightly taller than average, matched almost nothing about Nate, who was 34, dark-haired, and 6'2". It matched, almost exactly, a mutual friend of David's named Gregory Voss, a former Virion employee who'd left the company under vague circumstances a year earlier. Gregory Voss didn't hold up long under questioning. Detective Webb told me later that people who impersonate someone for a friend rarely have the stomach to protect that friend once the word homicide enters the room. Gregory admitted David had asked him to pose as Nate for a quick signature, telling him it was a minor internal paperwork correction. Nate was too swamped with wedding planning to handle himself. He said David paid him $3,000 in cash for an hour of his time, and that he hadn't thought much of it until police showed up at his apartment. I didn't know anybody was going to die, Gregory said, according to the interview transcript Detective Webb later shared with me. I thought it was some boring insurance thing. David made it sound like nothing. He also mentioned something else, almost as an afterthought, that David had asked him, a few weeks before that, whether he still had contacts from his time working part-time at a compounding pharmacy during college. At the time, Gregory said, he assumed David was asking out of idle curiosity, the kind of question that comes up in conversation and disappears just as fast. Detective Webb followed that thread to a former classmate of Gregory's, a pharmacy technician named Alicia Byrne, who confirmed she'd sold Gregory a small quantity of digoxin 6 weeks before the wedding, believing his explanation that it was for a family member's prescribed heart condition. She hadn't asked for documentation. She lost her job and her license over that decision, but she cooperated fully once investigators came to her, providing dates, quantities, and a text message where Gregory had asked her to keep the transaction just between us. A bartender named Miguel Ortiz, who'd worked events at the Marshall House for 6 years, remembered David personally delivering a champagne toast round to the head table himself, insisting on carrying 2 of the flutes over so the happy couple didn't have to wait in line, waving off the assigned server with a joke about wanting one job today as best man. It seemed sweet at the time, Miguel told Detective Webb. Best men do stuff like that. Carry the champagne, make a whole thing out of the toast. Nobody thinks twice about it at a wedding. Miguel hadn't thought anything of it at the time. It only became significant 9 days later, when Detective Webb asked him, specifically, whether anyone besides catering staff had handled any of the champagne glasses that night. Miguel remembered exactly which 2 flutes David had carried, because David had asked him beforehand which glasses were already poured and set aside for the head table. A small specific question that felt unremarkable in the moment and monstrous in hindsight. David Kessler had handed Nate his glass personally, with his own hands, in front of 70 witnesses, who all assumed it was nothing but a sentimental gesture between 2 men who'd built something together for 8 years. I told Diane, Nate's mother, everything the same evening Detective Webb confirmed the case was moving toward an arrest. She sat very still on her living room couch, the same couch where Nate had done his homework as a teenager, according to the photos she kept on the mantle. He came to the hospital, she said quietly, almost to herself. He sat with all of us. He helped carry the casket. I know, I said. I was there too. How do you carry someone's casket after you've done that to them? I didn't have an answer for her. I still don't, if I'm honest with myself. Detective Webb arrested David Kessler on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after Nate's death, at Varian's office, 20 minutes before a scheduled call with the Atlanta firm to finalize the acquisition David had been so eager to see close, on schedule. I wasn't there for the arrest. Detective Webb called me afterward, his voice carrying the particular flatness of someone who has delivered hard news enough times to know exactly how to pace it. We have the digoxin purchase, the forged beneficiary form, the notary identification, and Gregory Voss's full cooperation, he said. Combined with the insurance motive Harold Chen documented, the district attorney's office believes we have enough to charge David Kessler with first-degree murder. What did he say? When you arrested him? Nothing worth repeating, Detective Webb said, lawyered up before he finished putting his jacket on. I sat with the phone against my ear for a long moment, thinking about David crying in that hospital waiting room at 3 in the morning, his tuxedo still on, his hand around mine, telling me everything was going to be okay. He had known, at that exact moment, holding my hand, that Nate wasn't dying of a broken heart at all. The district attorney's office scheduled a bail hearing for the following week. Detective Webb told me David's attorney was already floating a defense built around Gregory Voss acting alone, without David's knowledge, for reasons of his own, as if a man who'd never once shown resentment toward Nate would spontaneously decide, unprompted, to forge a signature that happened to redirect $2 million into David's own account. I hung up the phone and looked at the black dress still hanging on the back of my closet door, the one I'd bought 2 days after my wedding, and I thought about the $18 million deal David had pushed so hard to keep on schedule. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number as I sat there. Gregory Voss isn't the only one who took David's money that week. Check who catered the reception.